Two A-10 Thunderbolts once saved a group of Marines. Let me explain. On October 28, 2008, 6 Special Operations Marines in Afghanistan were stuck in a compound and cut off from their unit, while dozens of insurgents pummeled them with rocket-propelled grenades, hand grenades, and small arms fire. The trapped soldiers kept calling for air support, but the F-18 Hornets in the area couldn't get a clear target due to the heavy cloud cover. That's when 2 A-10 Warthogs showed up from over 300 miles away. When they arrived, the Marines were on the verge of being overrun. The house where they were holed up was on fire, and about 60 insurgents were shooting through windows, trying to break in, flying low to get beneath the cloud cover. The A-10 made several dangerous passes over the insurgents, peppering them with their 30mm cannons and turning on their exterior lights to draw fire away from the trapped soldiers. When the Marines finally ran from the house, the insurgents were still close behind, but the A-10s continued strafing the enemy until the Marines made it back to their unit.
Why aren't fighter jets painted blue to hide in the sky? There are smart ways to camouflage jets, like those used by the USA, and some dumb ones, like those used by Russia or China. Let's start with the smart one. The USA prefers its jets to be painted in shades of gray because gray is actually the hardest color to see against the sky. The USA wants its fighter jets to be deadly and stealthy. USA uses black shading for stealth planes meant for night missions. Russia's bold choice of using light blue stems from the fact that they are still living in the 1980s. Light blue is the color of dogfighting, which is best when 2 planes are at the same altitude and pilots can see each other. Unfortunately for Russia, dogfights are a thing of the past, and US fighter jets can detect and shoot down any Russian planes long before the pilots can see each other. The color of your jet doesn't matter if it ends up as a fireball. China paints their jets in reflective silver, which is meant to look good. That's it. It is only for show. China does not want to and cannot hold any meaningful air fight against the USA. Maybe they hope to make US pilots laugh uncontrollably and then attack. Please follow and paint your jets gray.
How U.S. Navy drops massive aircraft carriers anchor at full speed. A vessel is anchored to the bottom of a body of water with the aid of a device that is typically constructed of metal to stop the craft from drifting because of the wind or current. The way an anchor hooks onto the seafloor, gains mass, or combines the two is how strong it is. Large masses sitting on the seabed, typically a block or slab of concrete, are used as permanent anchors. Large ships' anchors and semi-permanent mooring anchors, like mushroom anchors, get a lot of their holding strength from their mass, which also hooks or embeds in the bottom. Modern anchors for smaller boats include metal flukes that bury themselves in the seabed or catch onto rocks at the bottom. The rode secures the boat to the anchor, also called a cable or a warp. It can be constructed out of rope, chain, or a mix of the two. The scope is the proportion of the rod's length to the depth of the water. It is noisy, unclean, and risky to anchor a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier. Despite the unbelievable scale of the equipment, it is also a unique area of the marine world that few people ever consider. Anchors are frequently employed to keep a ship in place because it is not always feasible or desired to moor a Navy ship to a dock. Ground tackle refers to the tools used for anchoring, which include the actual anchor, the chains used to secure them to the ship, and the windlaces used to weigh the anchor, lift them back on board. A particular kind of hook that sinks into the ocean floor is an anchor. The tooth that actually bites into the bottom are the flukes, which are actually the shanks, the anchor's body. Older Admiralty pattern anchors feature a stock, a crossbar that prevents the anchor from resting flat and makes it easy.
Iran's president has crashed. This is massive breaking news. It is being reported by local Iranian outlets and major outlets like Reuters and AP that a helicopter convoy containing the president of Iran has crashed. Apparently there were 3 helicopters, and in the eastern part of Iran there was bad weather. 2 of the helicopters made it to their location successfully, but one of them has crashed containing the president of Iran. Now, other than that, there's no confirmation on whether or not he is not around anymore or how injured he is. All that everyone knows is that right now there is a massive search party going on, obviously to find the president of Iran. Now, there's going to be a lot of questions out there like, why did the other 2 helicopters just leave him behind? I mean, it's a helicopter. You can stop and go back. But other than that, again, it has been confirmed. I don't want to speculate too much. Make sure you do follow this channel for more updates and news. But if he is not around anymore. This is going to be massive, and this will change the shape of the Middle East, and we'll have to see what happens from there. But right now, it has been confirmed that the president has crashed.
There was once a fighter jet in the U.S. Air Force that pilots dreaded flying due to a deadly design flaw. This plane was the F-100 Super Sabre. A ground attack aircraft from the Vietnam War era, it became infamous within the military and among fighter pilots. The reason for this infamy was that aforementioned design flaw which would turn a simple piloting error into a fatal mistake. What could happen was if a pilot pitched the nose of the Sabre too aggressively, combined with a reduction in speed during a landing, it would cause the aircraft to repeatedly and violently shake up and down. By this time, it was too late for the pilot to take corrective action. The Sabre dance had already commenced, and once it started, you couldn't correct it, leading to the aircraft losing momentum and crashing onto the runway in a fireball.
Why are modern fighter jets like the F-22 Raptor slower than old fighters? Let me explain. Jets during the Cold War era boasted remarkable speed capabilities. The F-4 Phantom could reach top speeds of Mach 2, while the MiG-29 could reach incredible speeds of Mach 2.8. Fighter jets like the F-35 and F-22 are among the best in the world, yet they can only fly at Mach 2. But why is this? After the Second World War, speed became crucial, as it enabled pilots to effectively evade missiles and was thought to give them a clear advantage in combat situations. During the Vietnam War, fighter jets with top speeds of Mach 2 actually never reached anywhere close to those speeds in combat. The reason is that in order to maximize turn rate, pilots had to fly at subsonic speeds. And with the invention of hypersonic surface-to-air missiles, stealth and evasion have become better options than trying to outrun a missile. The U.S. Air Force also observed that jets weren't spending as much time flying at high speeds. Instead, most of the fighting occurred in close dogfights where maneuverability always beats speed. When Steve Phillis flew over the column of 10,000 enemy Iraqi soldiers to provide cover for his wingman, he knew he wasn't coming back. You see, the A-10 pilot had been dropping bombs over Saddam's elite Republican Guards division as part of Desert Storm when a surface-to-air missile was launched at his wingman. The wingman, a younger pilot, deployed flares in an attempt to escape, but the missile ripped through part of his wing, forcing him to eject. That left the young pilot dangling above the enemy army he had just been bombing. He would have been an easy target, but just then Phillis flew over the column and began dropping flares in order to draw attention away from his parachuting wingman. He continued his heroic flight for 3 minutes and 45 seconds, all the while coordinating his wingman's rescue until he was finally shot down and killed. The wingman was captured, but survived the war, while Phillis's actions earned him a posthumous Silver Star. Some believe his sacrifice merits the highest award of all, the Medal of Honor. His heroic behavior will certainly never be forgotten.
How much does Britain's flagship aircraft carrier cost? This 65,000-ton beast is Britain's most expensive military asset. It's basically a floating island with a length of 284 meters and a width of 70 meters. That's the equivalent of 2.7 football pitches per end to end. It has a top speed of around 37 miles an hour and a range of 10,000 nautical miles. That means it could go all the way to the Falkland Islands and have 3,000 nautical miles spare. Margaret Thatcher would be proud. It's also capable of carrying 72 aircraft, from fixed-wing jets such as the new F-35Bs, or rotary vehicles such as Merlin helicopters or even drones, and usually has a crew of 700. However, on board there's space to accommodate an additional 250 Royal Marines and support their attack helicopters and large transportation vehicles such as Chinooks. Nonetheless, this flagship is more than capable of defending itself. She's armed with the Phalanx close-in weapon system, designed to take out aircraft and hostile missiles, as well as Browning 50 caliber heavy machine guns. The vessel also houses the highly mechanized weapons handling system, meaning only 50 people are needed to arm and rearm the Phalanx close-in weapons, as well as the aircraft on board the ship. The vessel has taken almost 20 years to make and officially entered service in 2020. Initial costs were supposed to be in the region of 1.5 to 2 billion pounds. However, by the time construction had finished, this had crept up to over 3 billion pounds. It's not cheap to run either, costing 96 million pounds per year. Still, the most terrifying thing is that Elon Musk could buy 10 of these and run them for 15 years for the same price he paid for Twitter.
What do you call a powerboat that can turn into a submarine and also act as a stealth gunship? Well, this is all of those things, and they call it the SEAL carrier. Oh, and I almost forgot, it can also be deployed from a C-5 Galaxy. Its role is to provide covert insertion and extraction of US Navy SEALs during combat missions. It's got 3 modes of operation: surface mode, semi-submerged mode, and submerged mode. In surface mode, it can travel at speeds over 30 knots with a range of 300 nautical miles, using a 350 horsepower diesel engine powering 2 water jets. And it offers some active defense just in case anyone dares to mess around. To reduce visibility, it can enter its semi-submerged mode, which uses a snorkel to provide air intake, and it can travel near 10 knots in this mode. But if you need true stealth, it can transition to submerged mode. In this mode, SEALs are provided breathing systems. Why not a pressurized cabin? Because it would take the carrier too long to provide proper pressure for a truly sealed cabin, and the utility of the carrier is to transition quickly between modes.
What would happen if the USA and Iran went to war? The US's strategy would change everything. Let me explain. First, American Navy carriers and Air Force strike groups, supported by Saudi bases, would unleash a massive air assault on Iran. Predicting this, Iran might launch ballistic missiles, but due to the advanced air defenses and help from the Saudis, the impact would likely not change anything. The US Air Force would take out enemy air defenses, paving the way for rounds of strikes on missile sites, command centers, logistics hubs, and troop barracks. But an aerial strategy alone wouldn't be enough. To fully take control, the US might have to consider a ground invasion, with one of the biggest challenges being where they would enter. Landing on the shores could be an option, except they still have huge risks. However, once on Iranian soil, the actual size of the country would make things difficult. Taking the entire nation could require a force of approximately 1.6 million troops. If there was good reason behind the invasion, the US could likely gain international support from their allies. This is the world's most advanced helmet, but it costs $400,000. Let me explain. This helmet is used by F-35 pilots in the U.S. Air Force. Data about the pilot's airspeed, direction, altitude, and targeting will be shown on the visor. But the reason it's so expensive isn't what most people think. There is one ability that makes it worth every penny. The pilot can look at all their surroundings, even beneath where they're sitting and through the bottom of the jet. This is thanks to the helmet's ability to display instant video from 6 infrared cameras placed around the F-35. By showing every angle, the 360-degree display gives pilots X-ray vision. This feature could make the difference against other 5th-generation fighters, and if the F-35 is flying at night, since night vision is built into the helmet, there is no need for goggles. But that's not all. Fitting the helmets takes 2 days. In order to properly fit the helmet to the pilot's head, a unique multi-step fitting procedure is followed, which includes a 3D laser scan of the pilot's head and eye measurements. Why is there no fighter jet with 3 engines? This is the F-22 Raptor, a twin-engine 5th-generation fighter. And this is the F-35, the most advanced fighter in the world with just 1 engine. There is not a single fighter jet in the world that has 3 engines. But the reason for this isn't what most people think. Modern fighter jets can already reach very high speeds and altitudes. To achieve these performance needs, 2 engines are enough. However, the costs of running a fighter increase massively when a 3rd engine is added. More advanced technology is needed to operate all 3 engines and the control systems that go along with them. Even the aircraft's performance and agility will be worse with the extra weight caused by a 3rd engine. It even creates drag, which reduces range and distance capabilities, which could be the difference in a dogfight. But that's not all. In the event of an engine failure, modern fighter jets are built with 2 engines for backup. If one fails, it will allow the aircraft to return to base safely and be repaired by ground crews. Should the F-22 get a 3rd engine? What's the price of training a U.S. Air Force pilot? This is the B-1 Lancer, and it costs nearly $9 million just to train one single pilot. The price of training a B-2 pilot will absolutely astonish you. Starting with the F-35, $12,271,000. CV-22 Osprey, $3,527,000. MC-130, $4,067,000. F-18 Hornet, $3,646,000. F-22 Raptor, $13,248,000. F-16 Viper, $5,652,000. EC-130, $3,371,000. AC-130, $5,260,000. C-17 Globemaster, $4,681,000. E-3 Century AWACS, $4,832,000. B-2 Spirit, $11,279,000.
If the United States ever found itself in a ground war with China, how would it land its troops on land? They'd use what's called landing platform docks, which specialize in transporting Marines in large numbers from sea to land. These ships carry about 14 of what's called amphibious assault vehicles, which are specialized in providing both speed and protection for the landing party. They can also deploy LCAC hovercraft, which can get onto land in quite a hurry with a lot more troops but a lot less protection. The main landing platform dock ship is typically equipped with 2 RIM missile launchers and 2 Bushmaster cannons to fight off any enemy warships. Its well deck allows for the quick docking and deployment of its many specialized watercraft. One example of these types of ships is the USS Oak Hill, commissioned in 1996 and still in operation. Why do fighter jets fly in a V formation when flying in groups? Did they just watch too much Mighty Ducks growing up? Well, maybe, but there's actually a good reason to fly that way, hence why most species of birds do the same. When a fighter jet is in flight, the wings produce lift to keep the object aloft. However, they also create something called wingtip vortices, which are essentially airstreams that spin off the wingtips and trail behind the aircraft. These vortices can be quite strong and create turbulence for anyone following directly behind. But if an aircraft positions itself in the sweet spot, in what's called the upwash of the leading aircraft, it's partially shielded from these vortices, but can take advantage of the airstream to receive some free lift, reducing the energy needed to fly and thereby increasing fuel efficiency. The V formation isn't just about energy efficiency, however. By flying in a V, the lead pilot can easily see all the planes behind him, and the pilots in the rear can see the lead. This is less important in the era of high-end radars, but the habit developed as early as World War II.
On board, Big Abe is the Carrier Air Wing, CVW-2, consisting of 9 squadrons, 2X Super Hornet fighter bombers, 2X Hornet fighter bombers, 1X Hawkeye early warning fixed wing, 1X Prowler electronic warfare, 1X Greyhound logistical support aircraft, 2X Seahawk attack helicopter squadrons. Sensors, radars, and systems abound on this floating city. The ship features some 3 air traffic control radars, powerful air search radars, landing aid radars, and guidance systems. Countermeasures revolve around the SLQ-32A V4 suite and the SLQ-25A Nixie torpedo countermeasure systems. Crew complement is an impressive 3,200 sailors, along with 2,480 airmen. The ship's crew of 3,200 and the 2 480 air crew eats very well on Lincoln. Hard work around the clock requires a lot of daily meals. Each day, the crew consumes 800 loaves of bread, 13,000 sodas, and 660 gallons of milk. Each day, 540 pounds of hamburger meat is served, plus 180 dozen eggs and 800 pounds of fresh vegetables.
The Russian MiG-35, once hailed as the next-generation multi-role fighter jet, has lately been facing a myriad of challenges, resulting in its dwindling prospects. The MiG-35 has struggled to find its footing in the global arms market. Despite Russia's aggressive marketing efforts, the fighter jet has only secured a few contracts, primarily with Egypt. The development and production of the MiG-35 have been plagued by delays and technical problems. These issues have not only hampered its introduction into the Russian Air Force, but also raised concerns among potential buyers regarding the aircraft's reliability and performance. The MiG-35 is facing an uphill battle due to stiff competition, limited export success, technical issues, reduced domestic orders, and international sanctions. These factors have significantly impacted the aircraft's prospects, causing it to lose ground in the global fighter jet market and putting its future viability in question.
Russian submarines have something important that the United States doesn't, and that's windows. But why is this? These are real windows on a submarine that is capable of diving hundreds of meters, even though the hull is built from thick steel to withstand the extreme pressure. Windows were a feature found on the huge Typhoon-class submarines, and even new submarines like the Project 885 Yasen are being fitted with windows. So how is this actually possible without them cracking? The window frame is purposefully filled with water, and the hull is closed off from the tower. This keeps the windows intact by keeping the internal and external pressures balanced. But why are these windows even there? The reason for this is the cold weather. The submarine moves on the surface as it makes its way from the harbor to the dive spot, and assistance from some crew members on the tower is important. They have these window frames to keep people from freezing during the long missions. Temperatures of minus 25 degrees Celsius are expected in the northern Russian ports. However, they plan to replace the windowed towers on their newest submarines for a command structure where the crewmen are practically left out in the open with no windows.
When governments get in the mood for ending each other from the skies, they don't like to cheap out. So here are the top 10 most expensive aircraft in the U.S. Air Force. The cost of the number 1 spot will shock you. Number 10, the CV-22 Osprey at $107.5 million per unit. Number 9, the B-52 Stratofortress at $113.6 million per unit. Number 8, the F-22 Raptor at $149.8 million per unit. Number 7, the KC-135 at $168.3 million per unit. Number 6, the AC-130J at $193.3 million per unit. Number 5, the C-17 Globemaster at $385 million per unit. Number 4, the B-1 Lancer at $407.5 million per unit. Number 3, Air Force One at $424.9 million per unit. Number 2, the E-3 Sentry at $514 million per unit. And finally, number 1, the B-2 Spirit at $2.2 billion per unit. Did you know there is an aircraft that is so powerful it has never lost a fight in its almost 40 years of service? And it's probably not the aircraft you'd expect. The McDonnell Douglas F-15 Strike Eagle has a perfect aerial kill-to-death ratio of 104-0, meaning it has downed 104 enemy aircraft and has never once been taken down by an adversary. The majority of these 104 kills have been credited to the Israeli Air Force during the First Lebanon War, where it shot down 38 MiGs without a single loss. Due to its success, McDonnell Douglas has sold and exported the F-15 to many different nations such as the United States, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, South Korea, Japan, and Israel.
Why does NASA need fighter jets? This is the FA-18D used by NASA's Armstrong Flight Research Center, and this is the F-15D. Even though NASA doesn't need to take down enemy aircraft or carry out airstrikes, these fighter jets are still an important part of NASA's inventory. But the reason for this isn't what most people think. These jets are known as chase planes, and they aren't just for combat. They're crucial in training pilots into astronauts and keeping NASA's spacecraft safe. But why does NASA actually need these chase planes? NASA isn't just about space. They research and design advanced fighter jets and interceptors. Since the early 1960s, these chase planes have had a crucial role in monitoring other NASA aircraft in flight. The F-15D keeps constant radio contact with research pilots and gives an additional layer of safety during specific tests and maneuvers. However, the FA-18s specialize in photo or video chase missions, transmitting live video feeds back to the Armstrong Flight Research Center. This allows engineers to visually monitor missions as they unfold. Did you know that an F-15 once shot down a satellite? Let me explain. In 1985, during the height of the Cold War, the Pentagon found itself locked in a space race with the Soviet Union. The Soviets regularly launched satellites, closely tracking U.S. military movements and posing a severe national security threat. The plan was to use an F-15 fighter jet to carry a missile into space. Major General Pearson was tasked with destroying an outdated American research satellite. On September 13, 1985, at an airbase in California, the stage was set. Strapped into his F-15, Pearson was ready for takeoff. An enormous 2,700-pound, 18-foot-long missile was mounted beneath his jet. The satellite was positioned at 345,000 feet above Earth, hurtling through space at 23,000 feet per second. At 35,000 feet, Pearson had a 10-second window to launch the missile. There was no room for error. A slight mistake would lead to failure. He fired an homing device, guiding the missile into the sky.
In an intense moment, the missile homed in on its target and obliterated the satellite.
When the Libyan ruler Muammar Gaddafi declared the Gulf of Sidra as Libyan territory, he threatened to shoot down anyone who crossed it. But in August 1981, 2 US F-14s and an SA-3A Viking crossed this so-called line of death, resulting in dramatic consequences. You see, for years no one had dared to cross the line, even though it violated international boundary agreements. But on the morning of August 19th, the US decided to test that line by flying an SA-3 well within Gaddafi's death zone, and they didn't have to wait long for a response. Soon after the unarmed SA-3 entered the contested area, 2 Libyan Su-22s began heading towards them. Lacking defensive systems, the SA-3 would have been a sitting target if it weren't for 2 nearby F-14s, which engaged the Su-22s. After one of the Libyan fighter jets fired a missile but missed, both F-14s then locked on and destroyed them with AIM-9 Sparrow missiles. This incident was one of many tense moments between the two nations. What do you think? The 3 countries that are impossible to invade. The first will surprise you. At number 3, China. In recent years, China has undergone a crazy military makeover. Now they have the biggest standing army, navy, and air force, with a defense budget exceeding $250 billion in 2021, positioning them as a formidable force. Number 2, Russia. Armed with some of the most formidable nuclear capabilities globally, Russia maintains one of the biggest military forces. As the largest country on Earth, Russia has a defense budget of around $61 billion in 2021. Russia has a reputation for keeping a low-cost and highly efficient military force, which they've shown in recent years. Finally, at number 1, we have the United States. The United States have the largest defense budget in the world at $700 billion. With around 5,000 fighter jets, the United States maintains one of the most modern and largest air forces. Additionally, they possess 11 aircraft carriers, ensuring dominance in both air and sea operations.
What happens if 2 Russian planes fly dangerously close to a U.S. aircraft carrier? Let me explain. The USS Ronald Reagan was on a training mission over the Pacific Ocean. The carrier and a few other ships were part of an exercise with South Korea. However, things quickly took a turn when the crew realized 2 Russian Tu-142 Bear aircraft were approaching the ships. This aircraft was deadly and had the capability to fire multiple types of anti-ship missiles. One of the ships tasked with escorting the Reagan tried to make contact with the planes over radio. This was a guided missile cruiser, the USS Chancellorsville, but the Russians didn't listen or respond, and now they had gotten even closer. The planes were flying at 500 feet and less than 1 nautical mile from the ships. There was still no contact between the crew and the pilots. In response, 4 fully armed FA-18 fighter planes were sent out by the U.S. Navy to intercept the 2 aircraft. The jets escorted the Russian planes flying near the Navy ships away from the area. A Navy commander said that the interaction was safe and completely routine.
If you're a fighter pilot, you might imagine getting a cool call sign like Maverick or Bob. But in reality, you'll probably despise whatever call sign you're assigned, as these names are given to fighter pilots to remind them of embarrassing events or attributes. Some great examples include Grace, assigned to a female F-14 pilot after she tripped and gracefully fell off the wing of her Tomcat during pre-flight checks. There was also a fighter pilot of half German and half Japanese descent who was dubbed Axis. Then there's Bait. When he joined his first squadron, he shared the same last name as the captain, whose call sign was Shark. Next, there's Crotch. Let's just say he had a reputation as a bit of a player. Bud, short and simple, it stands for Big Ugly Dude. Another unlucky pilot ended up with Hair. And no, it wasn't because he was German. His last name was Peeves. We've also got Turd, a pilot who dropped his own bombs inside his F-4 Phantom. And if you dare to complain about your call sign, don't worry. Your Air Force buddies will team up to create one you'll hate even more. It would be a mix of good and bad to the rest of the world. The good, U.S. taxpayers would be saved from fighting irrelevant wars. 2, many nations would be more responsible for their own security instead of either depending on or blaming the Big Daddy. 3, the U.S. would be less hated and more admired. Why take hatred for solving conflicts that don't concern you? 4, the UN could be a more functional organization if the U.S. tried harder to get the UN working for peacekeeping. Right now, the U.S. gets impatient if it doesn't get the UN to move and goes on its own, resulting in things like 2003 Iraq. 5, There would be less ammunition for many terrorist organizations. Not just material, but the motive of fighting the big Satan would be gone too. The bad. 1. There would be an arms race and a number of nations would want to go nuclear. For instance, without the U.S., Japan would be forced to build a much more powerful military to defend against China. India was forced to go nuclear when it saw that the world community deserted it in 1962 conflict against China. More countries, especially U.S. allies, would come to the conclusion India went through and go nuclear. Europe would have to face the prospect of Russia and East Asia have to either mend fences or bend backs to China. 2. A lot more conflicts would happen without any action from the global community. U.S. didn't go into Rwanda and quickly pulled out of Somalia. Both regions went through brutal outcomes. As U.S. pulls out more, ISIS and other actors would rip through a lot of parts of the world. If you slip up as a fighter pilot, your comrades ensure it's a memorable blunder by bestowing upon you an embarrassing call sign related to that event. Consider, for instance, the pilot dubbed Bromage, a nod to his struggle with grasping basic flying skills. Hence, the call sign is short for brain damage. Then there's Hang Start, for a pilot who couldn't cease stuttering once seated in the cockpit. Next is Dash, a Marine Harrier pilot who discharged his own 9mm sidearm into his leg, earning the title that translates to Dumbass Shot Himself. An AWACS pilot, who was likened to a robot in demeanor and movement, earned the moniker Data. A Japanese F-16 pilot earned the title Val, no relation to Val Kilmer, simply an abbreviation for Very Annoying Lieutenant. Lastly, there's Sparky, whose live fire training session resulted in a wildfire engulfing over 100 acres of forest. Tell us in the comments if you know any funny call sign stories.
There are some good reasons to eject from a fighter jet, but this ejection has to be the dumbest in history. A 64-year-old French businessman had never expressed any desire to fly in a fighter jet, but he was gifted a fighter jet flight. It was a gift from colleagues, and the man felt he couldn't refuse. The pilot and the passenger got into a two-seater Dassault Rafale B. They took off. First, they experienced 3.7 G-force during the first few seconds. Then the plane reached 1,300 feet, and everyone inside experienced -1 G. The force of the takeoff made him float off his seat. Loose seat straps allowed him to float up. To steady himself, he involuntarily grabbed the ejection handle that was conveniently placed between his legs. The businessman ejected himself about 10 seconds into his flight. While flying at over 300 miles per hour, his parachute deployed, and he had a relatively soft landing in a nearby field. Fortunately, a malfunction prevented the pilot from being automatically ejected too, and he was able to land the plane on the runway despite the departure of his passenger and the loss of the cockpit canopy. The businessman also got a gift from the ejection seat firm, a tie that they only give to someone who ejected during a flight, usually a fighter jet pilot.
The Gerald R. Ford class is the biggest and most advanced aircraft carrier in the world. The vessel is one of the most important weapons of the U.S. Navy and is part of the most dangerous strike groups on the seas. The first aircraft carrier of the Gerald R. Ford class was Gerald R. Ford, which started serving for the U.S. Navy in 2017, and the cost per unit is almost $13 billion. The lead carrier of the program, the Gerald R. Ford, is the largest to exist, with a total displacement of 100,000 tons at full load. It is powered by two Bechtel A-18 PWR nuclear reactors and has a top speed of 30 knots. The vessel carries two RIM-162 ESSM and two RIM-116 surface-to-air missiles that can be used against both aircraft and hostile missiles. The carrier has a total capacity of 90 aircraft. Some of its options are the F-35 Lightning II, the F/A-18E Super Hornet, military helicopters, and unmanned aerial vehicles for various different missions.
How is this helicopter taking off when it has no glass for the pilot to see through? Is he just winging it and hoping for the best? Well, hopefully not. The answer is that it's actually an unmanned aerial vehicle called the MQ-8C Fire Scout. The helicopter design gives it a few advantages over most other drones and UAVs. For one, it can house highly advanced sensors and radars within it, allowing it to perform detailed reconnaissance, identify targets, and even direct manned aircraft to those targets. Secondly, it can be used for logistics support, able to transport supplies to hostile remote locations when it would be usually too risky to send human pilots through that route. It's built on a Bell 407 airframe, but only gets a measly range of about 150 miles, less than half the range of even most short-ranged helicopters, so it's still a bit of a work in progress.
Has an F-15 ever been shot down in air-to-air combat? Able to carry up to 23,000 pounds of payload, travel over 1,000 miles, and reach speeds of Mach 2.5, there's good reason why this aircraft boasts an air-to-air kill ratio of at least 104-0. Or does it? Rumors say that from the late 1970s to the early 1980s, a number of Israeli F-15s were shot down in conflicts with its neighbors, but no evidence or wreckage was ever produced. Then came Desert Storm, where F-15Cs were responsible for 36 of the 39 Iraqi aircraft shot down by the U.S. Air Force, apparently without a single loss. But during one aerial engagement, Iraqi radar operators claimed they watched an F-15 slow down and descend over Saudi Arabia. Assuming it had crashed, they called it a confirmed kill when a Bedouin smuggler claimed he found the wreckage. But again, no hard evidence. Ground defenses shot down 2 F-15Es, but the Eagle's perfect air-to-air record remains intact.
What if you sent a single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer back to 1941 at Pearl Harbor? Let's place our Flight 3 destroyer here, close to the battleship row. So it has 96 missiles, and 353 Japanese planes were used in attacks. Would it be able to defend? Due to their lack of radar countermeasures, the radar-guided missiles won't have any trouble spotting and locking onto the Japanese planes. The impact of losing 1/3 of your force before you can even get within attack range would be huge. For low-flying torpedo bombers, laser beams coming from the Helios laser would burn their propellers in mid-air, way before they could come close. And don't forget the Mark 45 gun. She can also hit any low-flying propeller plane, as she can fire 20 proximity-fused anti-aircraft rounds within a minute using the ship's fire control radar, which means it is almost impossible for low-flying torpedo fighters to get within shooting range. If they do manage to do so, the ship's modern armor will be a challenge to penetrate. This much firepower coming from just one ship would force the Japanese to retreat.
The United States Navy has 11 aircraft carriers. Russia has just 1. Why is this? Russia has the second largest air force in the world. That air force has over 4,000 aircraft, including the 4th-generation Su-33 and 5th-generation Su-57. Russia also has the world's third largest navy, and yet it has just a single aircraft carrier. So what happened? During the Cold War, as the Soviet Union beefed up its military, it made plans to build several large aircraft carriers, one of which was supposed to be 80,000 tons. And even now, Russia claims it will build a 100,000-ton nuclear-powered carrier by 2030. But Russia is much better at announcing new carriers than building them. That's because as a land power, a large carrier fleet isn't as important for them as some other countries. And with limited resources available, aircraft carriers are often seen as too expensive, especially when you consider all of the escort ships and support vessels in a carrier strike group. So Russia has just one carrier and may not get more.
Why are new fighter jets slower than old ones? Jets from the 1960s were built different. There was the MiG-25 Foxbat, which could reach speeds of over Mach 2.8. and the SR-71 Blackbird, which could reach speeds of Mach 3.3. The F-22 Raptor is one of the fastest new fighters, yet it can only fly at Mach 2. But what's the real reason new jets aren't as fast as before? After World War II, people realized that speed was the difference between life and death. The goal was to fly higher and faster, so you couldn't be shot down. Countries were in a race to develop the fastest jet possible. To shoot down an enemy jet, the interceptor needed to have the enemy aircraft in range. But then, advanced missiles were introduced, and these had a maximum speed of Mach 7, which was faster than any aircraft ever. But that's not the only reason. The U.S. Air Force noticed jets were not spending as much time flying at high speeds. Most of the fighting took place in close-quarters dogfights, where maneuverability is more important than speed, and this changed everything. What would happen if the USA invaded Iran today? A problem in the strategy could change everything. Let me explain. First, with Saudi bases giving support, American Navy ships and Air Force strike groups would launch a huge airstrike on Iran. Iran may have launched ballistic missiles anticipating this, but little would change because of Saudi Arabia's help and the country's strong air defenses. To be able to launch waves of strikes on missile sites, logistical hubs, command centers, and troop barracks, the U.S. Air Force would destroy the enemy's air defenses. However, an aerial assault by itself would not be enough. The U.S. could be forced to think about a ground invasion if it wants to take full power, and one of the main obstacles would be figuring out where to launch one. Although it still carries a huge amount of risk, landing on the coast could be an option. But once inside Iranian territory, the sheer size of the nation would complicate things. They would need up to 1.5 million soldiers to capture the whole country. If the invasion had a good reason, the U.S. could get help from their allies.
What would you choose? The AH-64 Apache or the AH-1Z Viper? While the Army chose the Apache, the Marines have stuck to an upgraded AH-1. Why is this? The answer may surprise you. The AH-64 Apache is a flat-out killing machine, and there's good reason why the Army chose it to replace the AH-1 Cobra years ago. Equipped with machine guns, rockets, and devastating Hellfire missiles, they can easily turn enemy tanks into piles of ashes. They also have advanced radar jamming electronics, twin engines, and a heavily armored cabin that make them juggernauts in the sky. That's because the Apache was specifically designed to protect Western Europe from the threat of a Soviet invasion. The Marines, however, have focused on different kinds of missions that require a helicopter that is highly maneuverable, fast, and can be easily repaired. And that is precisely why they've continued upgrading the AH-1 up until the present day, even though it has less firepower and a weaker airframe than the Apache. So, Apache or Viper, it all depends on the mission. When an RF-4 Phantom flown by an American and Iranian crew flew into Soviet airspace on November 28, 1973, there was no way they could have expected what was about to happen. For years, these Phantoms had been secretly crossing into Soviet territory on reconnaissance missions without being detected. But this time, as the Phantom crossed the border, a MiG-21 came up behind them and gave chase. The Phantom was faster, but the MiG pilot kept up and soon fired 2 R-3S missiles, which the Phantom had to dodge by making a hard break. Now that the Phantom had been slowed by the maneuver, the MiG pilot prepared to finish it off with his cannons. But these jammed, leaving the MiG-21 out of options. Or so it seemed. While other pilots would have given up at that point, the MiG suddenly sped toward the Phantom nose first, ramming it from the left side. The astonished Phantom crew immediately ejected and were soon captured by the Soviets. The MiG pilot, however, paid the ultimate price and was later awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union.
What is the fastest military ship in the world? Well, to put things into perspective, in calm waters, smaller boats can reach up to 70 miles per hour. But when the sea gets choppy, their speed drops to below 30. Take the USS Independence, a high-speed littoral-class combat ship that can reach 50 miles per hour in 8-foot waves, but they struggle with anything more challenging. When it comes to rough seas, size is the most important thing, and nothing currently beats the American supercarriers. Due to their colossal size and nuclear-powered engines, supercarriers outpace almost any military ship in choppy sea conditions. Even though publicly the U.S. Navy states their new supercarriers, like the USS Gerald R. Ford, can hit 35 miles per hour, but the real numbers are likely even higher. Decades back, the USS Kitty Hawk managed an average of 48 miles per hour, and they weren't even nuclear. So imagine what today's nuclear-powered Ford-class carriers are capable of. When in the roughest of seas, nothing comes close to modern carriers.
What's the longest amount of time an aircraft carrier has remained at sea? Both the Nimitz-class and Ford-class aircraft carriers are powered by nuclear reactors, which means they can go 20 years or more without refueling. Food and jet fuel don't last nearly as long, but carriers can be resupplied through regular underway replenishment. Still, aircraft carriers don't normally stay away from port for more than a month or two because of the thousands of men and women on board. Being away for so long can be a hardship, especially if you're stuck below deck for most of that time. But in 2020, amidst the pandemic, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower made history by remaining at sea for a record-breaking 205 consecutive days. The ship didn't make a single port call during that time, meaning the sailors were stuck on board. During that time period, the ship sailed more than 60,000 nautical miles and carried out hundreds of sorties. The previous record for consecutive time at sea was 160 days. Could you stay at sea for this long? Let's say a war between the USA and Russia gets initiated, and the U.S. Navy's Ohio-class submarines fire all their SLBMs. So what would they do after launching their 24 missiles? To fire their ballistic missiles, American submarines must descend 40 meters below the ocean surface. So their first task after the launch would be to go back as deep as they're capable of and stay as quiet as they could. Inside the submarine, most of the crew, if not all, would have some deep regret for what they had just done, because annihilating millions is not really a life goal for anyone. There is a chance that some heartbroken sailors will try to sink their own submarine. The submarine would try her best to avoid any undersea engagement by enemy attack submarines, and if there is a port left, it would be the crew's deepest wish that it would be a friendly one, and if they surfaced close to a beach, it would be the best scenario. If none of these options work, the submarine can still run 30 years without refueling as it is nuclear powered. What would you have done? Comment your thoughts below.
Why are explosives put inside the engine of this plane? This is the B-52 bomber, one of the most feared bombers in the American Air Force. And this is a scramble drill, used to evaluate and improve Air Force crews' reaction times. But in this specific drill, called minimum interval takeoff, the crews must scramble every B-52 at intervals of no more than 15 seconds. For it to take off, the B-52 must accelerate to around 140 miles per hour, and a fully loaded aircraft needs a runway that is 2 miles long. However, it normally takes more than 1 hour to start the engines and move this 84-ton war machine. But the Air Force has found a way to cut this 1 hour down to less than 10 minutes. This is known as the cart start. With this method, a little controlled explosive is put into 2 of the B-52's engines. It is then manually detonated by a member of the crew, which gives them a jump start. Except this takes even longer than a usual takeoff. There's a lot of safety checks they must complete before safely blowing up jet engines in a training situation like this so that nobody gets hurt. What happens if a fighter jet gets shot down over enemy territory? Let me explain. This F-14 went into a deadly spin after a surface-to-air missile exploded close to its tail near an Iraqi airfield. The 2-person F-14 crew ejected, but they got separated as they fell to the ground. After walking around for a while, the pilot dug a hole in the ground and took cover. Little did he know, one of the biggest rescue missions of Desert Storm was about to begin. The pilot tried to radio his crewmen, unaware that he had already been captured. But after 6 long hours of hiding, he tried the radio again, and this time, he heard voices from the United States saying that a combat search and rescue effort was underway. But just as the rescue crew was getting close, an Iraqi army truck began driving directly in his direction. However, this wouldn't be a problem as A-10 Warthogs had just arrived, and after 2 passes, their 30mm cannons eliminated the threat. Once the United States MH-53 helicopter was close to his spot, he jumped out of the hole and sprinted to the helicopter. He was safe. What happens if the U.S. Navy tries to sink their own aircraft carrier? Well, this question has been put to the test many times, including when they tried to sink the USS America. It was nearly impossible. Originally meant to be scrapped, the America embarked on her final voyage departing from Philadelphia. The carrier was chosen for a live fire test, a way for the Navy to study the resilience of modern aircraft carriers. If successful, the USS America would be the only supercarrier ever sunk. But despite a lot of planning, sinking this ship was a lot harder than everyone expected. The vessel's design was far better than all the ships that sank during World War II. With a double-layered hull and advanced compartments, it was a real challenge. During the 4-week trial, using controlled explosives, the America held up. The sheer size and design of the carrier meant she just wouldn't go down. The Navy crews ended up having to destroy her from on board. This way, the supercarrier eventually sank to the bottom of the ocean. The test showed that U.S. carriers can survive a lot due to their size.
The B-2 saw its first taste of action in the war over Kosovo during 1999, and later over Afghanistan in the 2001 U.S.-led invasion. The aircraft was successful with its pinpoint strikes using IDAMs and GPS-guided munitions. To showcase the aircraft's amazing endurance, missions to Europe and the Middle East originated from locations within the United States. Missouri is the home state of the B-2 flight group, and helped along by in-flight refueling. Before he passed, Northrop founder Jack Northrop himself was able to see the B-2 as it lay under development in its still classified form, seeing the realization of his flying wing dream. Today, the B-2, though limited by available numbers, provides the United States with a lethal first strike, odd first kill capability unmatched throughout the world. The Northrop Grumman B-2 Spirit, generically referred to as the stealth bomber, became the pinnacle of tailless flight design that began in the mind of Northrop founder Jack Northrop.
What happens when a Navy gunship attacks a cruise liner? Imagine this. You are armed with a 76mm main gun, air missile defense, and 2 smaller machine guns. And somehow you lose to a ship used to see penguins. In international waters, there was a German cruise liner called the Resolute. It had stopped for engine repairs. Things quickly took a turn when the ship caught the attention of a Venezuelan patrol boat named Neguato. The patrol boat demanded the crews to change course towards a Venezuelan port. But the Resolute crew ignored the orders and called their German headquarters. Suddenly, Neguato's captain opened fire at the crews, which the Resolute still ignored. Determined to get them to listen, the Venezuelans began to ram against the side of the liner, unaware that their target was designed to hold up against icebergs. However, the Venezuelan gunship kept pushing, losing strength with every hit against the liner's structure. Things got even worse for the Venezuelan boat. It had slowly destroyed itself and sank to the bottom of the ocean, losing to a Penguin cruise liner. NATO almost started World War III when it sent an F-16 to intercept a Russian plane. Let me explain. In international airspace above the Baltic Sea, there was a Tu-154 aircraft, a Russian plane that was carrying Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. The normal routine flight quickly took a turn when a NATO F-16 aggressively approached, flying dangerously close to the wings, showing to everyone on board that they were being watched. In response, a fully armed Su-27 flanker, serving as an escort to the Russian plane, entered the scene. The Su-27 intercepted the F-16 and tilted its wings to show the deadly weapons it had underneath. The Russian pilot took a position as if he was about to fire, sending a clear warning to the NATO fighter. He wanted him to back off. The Su-27 was ready to fire to defend the Russian aircraft. There was the possibility of a dangerous clash which would drag NATO into a war. The NATO F-16 quickly retreated, leaving the airspace and allowing the Russian plane to continue with its journey.
Can a fighter jet land at Area 51 without clearance or approval? In extreme cases, yes. Let me explain. There is only one such declassified landing. In 2001, a F-111 flying on a training mission malfunctioned right after dropping all of its explosive load on targets. It was not just a normal failure, as the engine decided to eat its compressors, causing all sorts of critical issues. Most of the controls lit red, and fire broke out that was then put out by the fire retardant system. The pilot had 2 options at that point: eject and crash the plane or try to land. He declared an emergency on all communication channels, stated his intention to land at Area 51, and glided into the really long runway. He managed to touch down and land the plane. A bunch of armed guys met him on the runway in jeeps and no sense of humor. But in the U.S. Air Force, an absolute aircraft emergency overcomes even the Area 51 safety protocols. Later, the pilot spent several hours being debriefed on what he did not see, and then he was put on a bus.
How do fighter jets get to war? Let me explain. If a war was to start today, the United States would need to immediately send its fighter jets to a base near the conflict. But the method to get these jets there isn't what most people think. There are different ways that have major advantages. The quickest way would be a direct flight. However, with long-haul travel, there needs to be air refueling and backup plans in case something goes wrong. If a group of F-35s needed to travel across the Atlantic, tankers and an A-400M would be deployed too. Another option would be an overland route. This way they could hop from airport to airport and easily refuel. But there is a lot of diplomatic work involved in this. Armed forces are expected to get permission before entering another country's airspace, unlike regular aircraft. The safest option would be delivery by ship. With an aircraft carrier full of fighters, the U.S. would have more fighters than some countries' entire inventory. But not every fighter has carrier capabilities. So let me know what you think is the best way to get there for fighter jets. What happens if a Russian fighter jet enters U.S. airspace? Let me explain. Near the end of the Cold War, a giant 4-engine Russian spy plane was about to run out of fuel and had to land on an Alaskan lake. The U.S. Air Force responded immediately. They airlifted fuel drums to refuel the stranded plane so that it could head back to Russia. Even though the Russian crew were nervous to get refueled, they just wanted their plane out of the country, and the U.S. luckily wanted the same. However, in another incident, things were different. Canadian Air Force pilots intercepted Russian aircrafts heading into Canadian airspace. They were a big threat, and they had to respond quickly. So they gave them a nice wave, an escort out of the country, and sent them home. But it was like a training exercise for the Canadians. Having faced off against Russian planes multiple times, they were unfazed and saw it as routine. Except today, relations are a little different. If a foreign military jet went into American airspace and was a threat, what do you think would happen? It's obvious that Putin has no respect for U.S. presidents, saying they are controlled by the deep state. However, he does have respect for one thing about the United States. Throughout history, Russia has been known as a land power, focused on winning battles through sheer numbers. But this means they lack a great navy to protect their coastlines. The U.S. has 13 aircraft carriers, capable of destroying entire nations. One U.S. aircraft carrier holds more power than Russia's entire air force. Russia struggles with just one barely functional aircraft carrier, while the U.S. has almost too many. But Russia's strategy means they don't need a big fleet of aircraft carriers or ships. They have a small strategic missile submarine force that carries the world's biggest nukes. The Russian Navy focuses on compact canals and smaller seas. Now this will blow your mind. Together, the U.S. Navy's fleet would come to 3.5 million tons, while the Russian Navy is much smaller. It would only be around 800,000 tons. Russia has always focused on defending its territorial waters and improving its ground forces. Why does NASA need fighter jets? This is the F/A-18D used by NASA's Armstrong Flight Research Center, and this is the F-15D. Even though NASA doesn't need to take down enemy aircraft or carry out airstrikes, these fighter jets are still an important part of NASA's inventory. But the reason for this isn't what most people think. These jets are known as chase planes, and they aren't just for combat. They're crucial in training pilots into astronauts and keeping NASA's spacecraft safe. But why does NASA actually need these chase planes? NASA isn't just about space. They research and design advanced fighter jets and interceptors. Since the early 1960s, these chase planes have had a crucial role in monitoring other NASA aircraft in flight. The F-15D keeps constant radio contact with research pilots and gives an additional layer of safety during specific tests and maneuvers. However, the F/A-18s specialize in photo or video chase missions, transmitting live video feeds back to the Armstrong Flight Research Center. This allows engineers to visually monitor missions as they unfold. When an enemy missile locks onto a fighter jet, what can the pilot do to stop being hit? There are only a few options, and knowing them could save your life. First, by using countermeasures like jamming, spoofing, or tricking the missile's guidance system. The pilot can attempt to break the missile's lock. Because of this, the missile could follow a false target, or even lose sight of the jet. If the missile is infrared guided, the pilot can use flares to create a hotter target than the aircraft. But the pilot could try to outrun the missile by creating as much space as possible between the jet and the missile. If the missile is fired from behind, the pilot can get an advantage in altitude by quickly accelerating and climbing. But if a surface-to-air missile is fired, reducing speed and diving down will help. This can make the missile lose speed and energy. The third option is to pull off an evasive maneuver. The pilot could try to fool the missile's guidance system by performing evasive maneuvers, like sudden changes in direction, speed, and altitude. This can cause the missile to miss or overshoot the fighter jet. What happens if the U.S. accidentally drops a nuclear bomb on itself? Well, it happened, and how is scary. In March 1958, nuclear bombs were being flown to North Africa by a U.S. Air Force B-47 bomber. All of this was part of Operation Snow Flurry. In case of a war with the Soviet Union, the B-47 was equipped with nuclear bombs. However, things took a turn when the pilots suddenly got an alert that one of the explosive's locking pins was not engaged. So the captain went down to the bomb bay to look into the problem. Everything seemed fine, and once he finished checking the bomb, he headed back to the cockpit. But just as the man climbed out of the bay, he accidentally pulled the emergency release pin, dropping a Mark 6 nuclear bomb over South Carolina. The explosion left a crater in the ground, buildings completely destroyed and 6 people injured. But how could a nuclear weapon do such little damage? Luckily, the bomb's nuclear core was kept somewhere else, so there was only a small explosion and nothing nuclear. The families involved sued the Air Force for the incident. Why is Zelensky desperate for the F-16 fighter jet? This is the Eurofighter Typhoon used by most European nations. And this is France's Dassault Rafale, one of the best fighter jets on the market right now. But the reason Ukraine only wants the F-16 isn't what most people think. The United States makes the F-16 fighter jet. It was created in the 1960s for both ground attack and air superiority missions, so it can have insane maneuverability. The F-16 is built to be unstable. This is one of the fighter's biggest advantages, which makes it very successful in dogfights. Any country can count on this fighter since it can travel long distances and hit speeds above Mach 2. But Zelensky thinks the F-16 fits Ukraine's counteroffensive plan perfectly, much more than any other fighter. And once the war is finished, the jet will be crucial in the country's long-term security. However, there's a problem. The new training facility in Romania designed to teach Ukraine's pilots has the planes ready and the flying instructors waiting. But the pilots from Ukraine have not yet arrived. Why don't these expensive fighter jets fall off the aircraft carrier in rough seas? The jets are tied down using heavy iron chains. And these things, known as pad eyes, are attachment points that are scattered around the deck. These cover the entire sides where the jets and helicopters are parked, and each jet is tightly secured using multiple chains. But that's not the only reason. The aircraft themselves have landing gear brakes by default, and the aircraft carrier is surrounded by a small barrier called a scupper, which is roughly 15 centimeters high. However, if there's a storm, the aircraft would be much safer if they were in the hangar below the aircraft carrier deck. But not all of them can fit in there. Even when the USS Kitty Hawk was hit by a typhoon, the planes were still safe. A normal carrier is meant to be able to hold up to 90 aircraft in the hangar, except only 50 can fit properly. The problem is carriers usually carry around 64 aircraft in total, and the number that can fit in the hangar is even lower on smaller carriers. Remember, fighter jets can't swim yet, so if one falls in, it will be a big financial loss to the military.
In 1982, one of the largest jet battles in history began when Israeli F-15s, F-16s, and F-4s attacked 19 Syrian surface-to-air missile sites, which had been threatening Israeli forces conducting operations against the PLO in Lebanon. After destroying 17 of them, the Israeli Air Force suddenly picked up dozens of Syrian fighter jets headed their way. As the fighters came soaring into the valley in tightly packed waves, it must have been an intimidating sight to see. But things weren't as they seemed. You see, the Syrian force consisted mainly of MiG-21s and MiG-23s, which proved sadly ineffective against the Israelis' more advanced American-made jets. In fact, as soon as the Syrians got within a few miles of the Israelis, electronic jamming rendered their radars useless. Flying blind, 26 Syrian jets were shot down within half an hour. By the time a ceasefire was finally signed, Israel had shot down 82 Syrian jets, while amazingly they suffered no losses.
Have you seen the new super advanced helicopter by the U.S. Army? World War III is going to be crazy when this helicopter starts rolling out. This is the MQ-8 Fire Scout. This high-tech helicopter has a range of features that make it unique. First, its distinctive four-blade main rotors not only reduce noise but also increase lift capacity and performance. What powers this beast is the mighty Rolls-Royce M250 turboshaft engine. This powerful engine allows the MQ-8 to reach a maximum speed of 213 kilometers per hour, while reaching altitudes of up to 20,000 feet. However, what truly makes the MQ-8 a game-changer is its advanced avionics system. This new technology not only automates various tasks, but also improves its skills as a combat helicopter. Its arsenal is crazy. It has the ability to carry Hellfire missiles, Viper Strike laser-guided weapons, advanced precision kill weapon systems, and laser-guided 70mm folding fin rockets. Would you rather pilot an attack helicopter or fighter jet?